Well, not many showbiz relationships survive, but one of the most endearing and enduring Hollywood love stories was between Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward. They were married for 50 years and their partnership extended to the big screen, starring in several films together.
In a town built entirely on superficial affairs and fleeting romances, Paul Newman was the exception. He was the most desired man in Hollywood. Yet, for more than 5 decades, he remained famously faithful to just one woman. But that loyalty didn't mean he was blind. Newman worked opposite the most beautiful icons in cinema history, and he saw things in them that most men missed. From the princess who silenced a chaotic set to the rebel who broke every rule, these are the 8 women Paul Newman believed were the true gold standard of beauty, and the one woman who surpassed them all. Joanne Woodward, the homemaker. To understand Paul Newman's taste in women, you have to start with the most famous quote about fidelity in Hollywood history. When asked by Playboy magazine in the 1970s how he managed to stay faithful to his wife while surrounded by the most beautiful actresses in the world, Newman shrugged and delivered a line that became legend. "I have steak at home. Why should I go out for a hamburger?" It's a funny line. It's charming. But to truly understand Paul Newman, you have to realize that he wasn't talking about cooking. He was talking about substance. When Paul first met Joanne Woodward in 1953, he wasn't the superstar. He was a terrified, sweating, anxious 28-year-old actor trying to escape the heat of a New York summer in an air-conditioned agent's office, and sitting there cool as ice was Joanne. She wasn't a hamburger. She wasn't fast food that looked cheap, easy, and satisfying for a moment. She was intricate. She was formidable. She was an Academy Award winner before he was, a serious artist who intimidated him with her intelligence. While other actresses were busy flirting or fixing their makeup, Joanne was reading books, dissecting scripts, and challenging directors. Newman was struck by something deeper than physical attraction. He was struck by her brain. He later confessed that he felt like a pretty boy next to her, a man skating by on his looks while she was doing the real work. That intimidation turned into fascination. He realized that true beauty wasn't just about symmetry or a perfect smile. It was about the kind of woman who could stare you down and make you want to be better. For 50 years, their marriage was the anchor of his life. It survived the pressures of fame, the temptations of co-stars, and the tragic death of their son, Scott Newman. Through it all, Newman's admiration never wavered. He didn't just love her, he respected her. And that respect became the lens through which he viewed every other woman he met. He wasn't looking for another pretty face to decorate his arm. He was looking for that same spark of intelligence, that same refusal to be ordinary. And the first woman on his list who matched that description wasn't an actress at all. She was royalty. Grace Kelly. The silence in a loud room. If Joanne Woodward was the anchor that kept Paul Newman grounded, Grace Kelly was the cloud that floated just out of reach. To understand why Newman and the rest of the world were so captivated by Grace Kelly, you have to understand what Hollywood was like in the 1950s. It was a circus. It was loud, sweaty, and desperate. Agents were screaming into telephones. Starlets were posing for paparazzi in bikinis. And actors were fighting for every inch of spotlight they could get. And then there was Grace. Newman, who was a method actor, gritty, intense, and often mumbling his way through emotional scenes, watched Grace Kelly with a kind of baffled awe. She didn't sweat. She didn't scream. She didn't fight for attention. She simply existed, and the cameras turned towards her like sunflowers following the sun. He famously described her as silence in a loud room. On set, while everyone else was frantic, Grace possessed a stillness that was almost unnerving. She would sit in her chair, reading a book, wearing white gloves in a dusty studio, and the chaos would seem to bend around her. She didn't need to shout to be heard. She forced you to lean in. Newman admired this quality because it was something he struggled with. He was constantly trying to prove himself, constantly working to be real. Grace didn't have to try. She had an innate self-possession that couldn't be taught in acting class. This is why, when she made the shocking decision to leave Hollywood forever in April 1956 at the age of 26 to become the Princess of Monaco, Newman wasn't surprised. Despite being at the height of her career, Kelly was reportedly exhausted by the at times demanding, impersonal, and rigid studio system of Hollywood. But to Paul Newman, she had always been royalty. The crown was just a formality. He respected her choice to walk away. In an industry where people cling to fame until their fingernails break, Grace Kelly let it go with an open hand. She proved that her dignity was more valuable than her box office returns. She was beautiful not because she was a movie star, but because she didn't need to be one. Audrey Hepburn, the Auntie Marilyn. If Grace Kelly was the ice, Audrey Hepburn was the light. When Audrey arrived in Hollywood, the definition of beauty was set in stone. It was the era of the bombshell. It was Marilyn Monroe, Jane Mansfield, and Diana Dors. The ideal woman was expected to be curvaceous, platinum blonde, and overtly sexual. She was supposed to pout and wiggle. Audrey Hepburn didn't wiggle, she floated. Paul Newman, who often played characters driven by raw, masculine desire, found something deeply refreshing in Audrey. She broke the mold. She was slender, dark-haired, and dressed with a simplicity that made the bombshells look like they were trying too hard. But what Newman saw in Audrey wasn't just a waif-like fashion icon. He saw the eyes of a survivor. Unlike the American stars who had grown up in comfort, Audrey had survived the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands during World War II. She had nearly starved to death eating tulip bulbs to survive. Newman, who had served in the Navy during the war, recognized that look. It was a depth behind the eyes that said, "I have seen the worst of the world, and I have chosen to be kind anyway." That choice, to be kind, was what cemented her beauty in Newman's mind. Later in life, as Newman turned his own attention toward philanthropy with Newman's Own, giving away millions to charity, he looked at Audrey Hepburn with a new level of reverence. She hadn't spent her retirement fighting to look young. She hadn't spent it chasing younger men or getting plastic surgery. She had put on a t-shirt and cargo pants and gone to the most dangerous, poverty-stricken corners of the globe for UNICEF. For Newman, this was the ultimate trump card. In a town where beauty is usually selfish, hoarded, protected, and monetized, Audrey's beauty was generous. She gave it away to the people who needed it most. She proved that the most beautiful thing a woman can wear isn't a Givenchy dress, it's compassion. If Grace Kelly was the silence in a loud room and Audrey Hepburn was the light that floated above it, the next woman on Paul Newman's list of 8 most beautiful women ever didn't float. She detonated. Elizabeth Taylor, the Hurricane. By 1958, Paul Newman had established himself as the cool hand. He was the actor who simmered. He kept his emotions locked tight behind those blue eyes, letting the audience guess what he was thinking. But when he walked onto the set of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, he met the one woman who could shatter that cool with a single glance, Elizabeth Taylor. If you want to understand chemistry, you don't look at a science textbook. You look at Newman and Taylor in that movie. The set was a pressure cooker. The script called for Newman, playing the alcoholic and broken brick Pollitt, to resist the desperate affection of his wife, Maggie, the cat. It required him to be made of stone. But standing opposite him was Elizabeth Taylor in a white slip, radiating a kind of raw, desperate heat that made the air in the studio feel thick. Newman later admitted that working with her was like trying to stand upright in a hurricane. She wasn't acting in the way he was taught. He was calculating, thinking, and processing. Elizabeth was just feeling. She threw herself into scenes with a ferocity that terrified him. But what cemented her place on Newman's list wasn't just her legendary violet eyes or her on-screen seduction. It was what happened when the cameras stopped rolling. Tragedy struck in the middle of filming. Elizabeth's husband, the love of her life, Mike Todd, was killed in a plane crash. The studio panicked. They assumed the production would shut down for months. They assumed the grieving widow would collapse. She didn't. Against all odds, Elizabeth Taylor returned to the set just weeks later. She was starving, she was grieving, and she was barely holding it together. But when the director yelled action, she channeled every ounce of that pain into her performance. She screamed, she cried, and she clawed at the walls of the set. Newman watched this happen from inches away. He realized then that her beauty wasn't just about perfect features. It was about guts. Elizabeth Taylor lived her life without a filter. She loved too hard, she married too often, she ate too much, and she screamed too loud. She was messy. In an era where studios tried to polish their stars into perfect plastic dolls, Elizabeth was unapologetically human. Newman, who spent his life trying to be real, looked at Elizabeth Taylor and saw the most authentic creature in Hollywood. She was beautiful because she was a survivor. Elizabeth Taylor was a force of nature, a storm that tore through Hollywood, leaving wreckage in her wake. But the next woman on Newman's list was the Earth itself. She was grounded, unshakable, and unapologetically alive. Sophia Loren, the Earth Mother. Paul Newman met Sophia Loren in 1965 on the set of Lady L. By then, he was used to the neuroses of American actresses. He was used to women who were terrified of losing their looks, women who starved themselves to fit into costumes, women who needed constant reassurance from their directors. Sophia Loren was none of those things. When Sophia walked onto a set, the temperature in the room changed. She didn't walk with the anxious hustle of a Hollywood starlet. She walked with the slow, confident stride of a woman who knew exactly who she was. She was Italian, she was proud, and she took up space. Newman was immediately struck by her relationship with life. While his American co-stars were picking at salads and worrying about camera angles, Newman watched Sophia cook rigatoni for 40 crew members in her dressing room between takes, laughing as she argued with the director about whether garlic should be minced or pressed. She loved food. She loved laughter. She loved her body, not because it was perfect by studio standards, but because it was hers. There is a specific kind of beauty that comes from absolute comfort in one's own skin, and Sophia Loren was its master. Newman, who was famously self-critical and often riddled with anxiety about his own performances, found her presence to be a relief. She was maternal without being old. She was sexual without being desperate. She anchored the film. He famously said of her that she had the kind of face that makes you forget your name. But the beauty he really admired was her lack of vanity. In Two Women, the film that won her an Oscar, Sophia didn't play a glamour queen. She played a mother in war-torn Italy, covered in dirt, screaming in grief, protecting her daughter. She let herself look ugly, desperate, and broken. Just like Elizabeth Taylor, she prioritized the truth over the image. For Newman, this was the ultimate validation. He saw in Sophia Loren a woman who didn't need Hollywood to tell her she was beautiful. She knew it. And because she knew it, she didn't have to fight for it. She simply existed, warm and solid, reminding everyone else that life was meant to be enjoyed, not just filmed. Brigitte Bardot, the wild child. By the late 1950s, Hollywood was beginning to feel like a museum. The leading ladies were statues, perfect, polished, and trapped inside corsets. They spoke with fake transatlantic accents and didn't dare smudge their lipstick. The industry was desperate for something real, something that could breathe. And then a bomb went off in France. Her name was Brigitte Bardot. When she exploded onto the screen in *And God Created Woman*, she didn't just change cinema, she terrified it. Paul Newman, a man famously disciplined about his craft, studying scripts, rehearsing for weeks, agonizing over every line, looked at Bardot and saw a creature from another planet. She wasn't acting. She wasn't posing. She looked like she had just rolled out of bed, thrown on a sheet, and walked onto a movie set by accident. He famously said she had that raw, undone look, like the rules didn't apply to her. To Newman, watching Bardot was like watching a wild animal released into a formal dinner party. While American studios were busy creating products, polishing starlets until they shined like plastic, Bardot was proudly, defiantly imperfect. She danced on tables with bare feet. She walked around Saint-Tropez with messy hair. She didn't care about pleasing the press or charming the studio heads. She lived entirely for her own pleasure. For Newman, who often felt trapped by the heavy expectations of being a serious actor, Bardot represented the ultimate fantasy, freedom. She didn't care if you thought she was good. She barely cared if you thought she was pretty. She just was. That total indifference to the male gaze, that refusal to ask for permission, made her infinitely more desirable than the women who were desperate for approval. Lauren Bacall, the original cool. While Bardot broke the rules by ignoring them, another woman on Newman's list broke them by rewriting the definition of toughness entirely. She taught Hollywood that a woman didn't have to be soft to be beautiful. In fact, she could be tougher than the men. Lauren Bacall. Decades before the feminist movement took hold in Hollywood, Bacall walked onto the screen in To Have and Have Not, and refused to be rescued. She was 19 years old, terrified, and shaking so badly she had to tuck her chin down to her chest just to keep her head steady. She looked up through her eyelashes to stop the trembling, creating the look that became legend. But what Newman saw in that look wasn't fear, he saw guts. Bacall wasn't a damsel. She wasn't waiting for Humphrey Bogart to save her. She was his equal. She walked into a room, lit her own cigarette, and delivered lines with a voice so deep and smoky, it sounded like it had been cured in whiskey. "You know how to whistle, don't you, Steve? You just put your lips together and blow." Newman loved that line. He loved that attitude. In a town full of women playing victims, Bacall played survivors. She was one of the boys without ever losing her femininity. She could drink with them, smoke with them, and trade insults with them. She never once asked for their protection. He called her the most dangerous woman in a cocktail dress. It was a compliment of the highest order. To Newman, dangerous meant interesting. It meant she had a spine. It meant she wasn't just there to look pretty, she was there to win. While other actresses faded when their youth disappeared, Bacall only got cooler. She aged into a lioness of the theater, winning Tonys and dominating Broadway long after Hollywood tried to put her out to pasture. Newman admired that resilience. He admired that she never softened her edges to make people comfortable. She stayed sharp, she stayed tough, and she stayed cool until the very end. Ali MacGraw, The Death of Glamour. By 1970, the party was over. The studio system that had manufactured goddesses like Grace Kelly and Marilyn Monroe was dead. The world had changed. Vietnam was raging, the Beatles had broken up, and audiences were tired of perfection. They didn't want to see another untouchable queen in diamonds. They wanted to see a human being in jeans. And in that new, raw landscape, Paul Newman found the final face on his list, Ali MacGraw. When Love Story hit theaters, it shattered box office records not because of special effects, but because of a knit hat and a face stripped clean of Hollywood artifice. Ali MacGraw didn't look like a movie star in the traditional sense. She didn't wear false eyelashes. She didn't have the carefully sculpted hair of the 50s. She had an Ivy League intelligence and a bohemian spirit that felt shockingly real. Newman, who was entering the grittiest phase of his own career, trading his tuxedo for prison stripes in Cool Hand Luke, recognized a kindred spirit. He saw in Ali a rejection of the mask. She wasn't trying to seduce the camera. She was trying to talk to it. Her beauty felt earned, not applied. It was the beauty of intellect, of conversation, of someone you could actually imagine meeting in a library. For Newman, this was the evolution of beauty. It wasn't about being placed on a pedestal anymore. It was about being eye level. Ali MacGraw represented the modern woman, someone who could be smart, difficult, tragic, and beautiful all at once, without ever needing a studio to tell her how to do it. She proved that you didn't need the lighting, the costumes, or the makeup chair to capture the world. You just needed to tell the truth. 8 women. Looking at this list, you begin to wonder how one man, the most desired actor of his generation, stayed faithful to one woman for 50 years. Joanne Woodward was the chameleon who could match any of these women beat for beat. She had the intellectual firepower to intimidate a young Paul Newman. She had the Oscar-winning talent to challenge him professionally. She had the Southern grit to raise a family in the chaos of Hollywood, and the quiet dignity to stay out of the tabloids. She was his anchor, his equal, and his challenge. When Paul Newman famously asked, "Why go out for a hamburger when you have steak at home?" he wasn't making a joke about cooking. He was talking about the richness of a shared life. He was saying that true beauty isn't a single trait you admire from afar. It is 1,000 small moments of respect, laughter, and partnership that you build together. Paul Newman spent his life looking at the most beautiful faces in history. But in the end, the only face he never got tired of watching was the one across the breakfast table. And if you enjoyed this deep dive video, make sure to subscribe for more stories just like this one. Thanks for watching.